Hello and welcome. Sometimes in the bus industry there are some very interesting what might have been things. I did a video a little while ago about Eastern Coachworks bodied Leland TN Titans, for example. But another one of these interesting things, and again associated with London, is the front entrance rear engined Routemaster bus. The arrival of the Leland Atlantean and the later Daimler Fleet line showed that the rear engine layout offered a number of advantages. Although deemed not as reliable as a traditional front engine bus, the engine at the rear was more accessible, so when it did need repairs it was easy to get at. Seating capacity was increased, and the main advantage was that the doors and the platform was under close supervision from the driver, which reduced the risk of accidents from passengers trying to get on and off the bus. Now remember, all this was before one-man operated double-decker buses was made legal. That didn't come into fruition until 1966. And despite some valiant attempts by various operators such as Brighton and Eastern National, it's generally accepted that one of the best layouts for a one-man operated double-decker bus is to have the engine at the back. Now apparently at least part of the idea behind the rear engine Routemaster was to combat the severe staff shortage that London Transport was experiencing at the time. Now it's quite interesting, as I've just said, that the one-man operated buses weren't yet legal, so I wonder if London Transport were going to try and press gang the government into changing the law a little bit earlier had the FRM been successful. As we will see later, the FRM actually had the same seating capacity as an RML, and the RML was a bit of an outdated design by the time it came into production. And around the UK at the time, operators were taking deliveries of Leland Atlanteans and Daimler Fleet lines. And London Transport, used to building its own buses for its own needs, had no equivalent vehicle. So in 1964, work started on a rear-engined Routemaster type bus. AEC, Park Royal, and of course London Transport were all involved in the design. As far as London Transport were concerned, the standard Routemaster was seen as a very reliable vehicle, so this would be the basis of the new bus. By December 1966, the first rear-engined Routemaster prototype, the one we all now love and know as FRM1, was rolled out for a press inspection. Now, depending on where you read your research from, it had between 60 and 80% compatible parts with a standard Routemaster bus. FRM1 seated only 72, as I said before, which was the same as an RML, with 41 in the upper saloon and 31 in the lower saloon. Compared with its contemporary rear-engine buses, the lower deck floor was comparatively high, which was felt it minimised wheel arch intrusion. The bus was powered by the 11.3 litre AEC AV691 engine and was rated to provide 150 brake horsepower at 1,800 RPM. The engine was installed transversely, the same way as the Daimler Fleet line and the Leland Atlantean. The 4-speed fully automatic epicyclic gearbox received drive from the engine via a shaft from the flywheel and transfer gear, which sounds very similar to the Daimler Fleet line, doesn't it? Because the gearbox and the engine was separate on that bus, and that was driven between the two by a short prop shaft. The thought being having the engine and gearbox slightly separated made maintenance a little bit more easier. The rear axle was more or less a standard Routemaster axle, which had been turned around so that the drive went in at the opposite end. This was fitted with Firestone air suspension. The bus was registered KGY4D and entered service from Tottenham Garage on the 26th of June 1967, running alongside Leland Atlanteans. At Tottenham it worked the 76 and the 34B routes, and it was well received by the crews and the passengers. However, on the 31st of August 1967, leaking flywheel oil caught fire while it was on service in central London. Fortunately though, nobody was hurt, although the bus had filled with black smoke and several of the windows were smashed to help the smoke disperse. By the end of 1969, it had been equipped for one-man operation and had been transferred to Croydon. It later moved to Potter's Bar, also working there as a one-man operated bus, and then finally found a role on the Round London sightseeing tour. For this duty, it was fitted with a cassette tape player with 4 speakers on each deck. So this all sounded incredibly promising. Everybody seemed to like this bus, didn't they? So why didn't it make it into full production? Well, that's quite simple, and potentially down to one person. But before I name the judge, jury and hangman who killed off the FRM project, we need to go back in time. We'll go back to 1948. This was the year that the mighty AEC acquired Crosley Motors and the Maudsley Motor Company. And this prompted AEC to set up Associated Commercial Vehicles, also known as ACV, as the holding company on the 1st of October 1948 for the newly acquired businesses and its own manufacturing firm, which was renamed AEC Limited. And now we're going to jump forward to 1962, when Leland Motors acquired ACV, and this also included the companies of Park Royal Vehicles and Charles H. Rowe. So by the time the rear engine Routemaster was designed and born, it was already a byproduct of British Leyland. Now that same year, 1962, Donald Stokes, who had previously been a sales director with Leyland, was appointed the managing director of Leyland Motors Limited. In 1966, he would go on to become the chairman of Leyland. And let me just confirm that I said Donald Stokes rather than Doris Stokes. She did something completely different. As far as Donald Stokes was concerned, there was no room in the Leyland catalogue for another rear-engined double-decker bus. Leyland produced the Atlantean, and that was the bus of the future. And the project was quickly but quietly killed off. Now, although that wasn't the only reason the rear-engined Routemaster idea was killed off, it's a bit of a strange thing for Lord Stokes to say, isn't it? Especially when you think in 1965 Leyland was to take on a 25% share in Bristol Commercial Vehicles, who at that time were developing the Bristol VRL, which would morph into the VRT. And then in 1968 Leyland was to merge with British Motor Holdings, which was the parent company of Daimler, who of course were producing the Fleet line. So you would have heard me many times on this channel explain how British Leyland was the majority bus manufacturer when it came to all bus chassis, including rear-engine double-decker chassis. Another strange point is that British Leyland, as we all know, was manufacturing the Leyland Leopard. Throughout the lifetime of the Leopard, there was only one bus that ever came close to it in terms of production, and was also its biggest rival. And that, of course, was the AEC Reliance. And don't get me started on the whole AEC Swift, Leyland Panther, Daimler Roadliner, and of course Bristol RE thing. So for Donald Stokes to say that he didn't want the FRM project to go ahead because the Leyland Atlantean was going to be the only rear-engined double-decker bus does seem a little bit strange, doesn't it? And I suppose really this goes to some way to show how arrogant Leyland was at the time, knowing that London Transport was a huge fan of AEC vehicles, but not really accommodating their needs and their requirements. I mean, they could have offered an AEC engine in the Atlantean and made modifications to that chassis, especially when you think when Bristol Commercial Vehicles launched the Bristol VR, that the AEC engine was an option in that, although it was an option that wasn't taken up by any operator. So the question I suppose we all want to know is, had the rear engine Routemaster project gone ahead, would it have been a success? Well, that's very hard to say. There's always been a lot of speculation over it. And it depends on how you look upon the success of the conventional Routemaster bus. Yes, it sold well to London Transport, but apart from buses going to British European Airways and Northern General, and it's worth mentioning at this point that BEA's maintenance was done by London Transport, so they no doubt influenced BEA to buy the Routemasters in the first place. But apart from those operators, there were no new Routemasters sold in the UK. And although the total number of Routemasters built adds up to a respectable 2,876, 2,761 of those were for London Transport. And it was very much a bus for London Transport. Now, another interesting thing to look at is the history and the performance of AEC's other rear engine designs. And these were, of course, another reason why the rear engine Routemaster design never took off, because London Transport changed its policy. It decided that the way forward was through high-capacity standee single-decker buses rather than double-decker buses, and bought lots of AEC Swifts and then AEC Merlins. And double-deckers took a bit of a back seat. And these AEC Swifts and AEC Merlins became known for their reliability issues, which is a shame because, as you know, I'm involved with the preservation of an East Kent AEC Swift, VJG187J, which is owned by the Friends of the East Kent. Little plug there for them. And I've always thought that the AEC Swift was actually a fine vehicle, once you've taken the time and the trouble to sort out a few of its quirks, such as the cooling fan and things like that. But the Merlins and the Swifts operated by London Transport certainly didn't have long lives and certainly didn't have a very good reputation. Now, more than likely, this is down to London Transport's maintenance schedules and maintenance training at the time, rather than the actual build quality of the vehicles. Remember, they were still AECs, and this was the same company that had been supplying London Transport and its predecessors with buses since time immemorial. In fact, a lot of these buses actually had the same engines as the Routemasters and the other AEC buses as well, although the engine was, admittedly, turned onto its side and being horizontal. And there is an interesting saying that says, horses tend not to run so well when they're laying down. And that could apply to bus engines in particular. So there is a strong possibility that had production of the rear engine Routemaster started and they'd gone into service, that they would have experienced problems akin to the AEC Swifts and the Merlins. Now, as I mentioned earlier on, FRM1 experienced an engine compartment fire. Now, although this was caused by an incorrectly fitted flywheel seal, it could be a problem that might have reared its head in service when the engines overheated and things got a little bit too hot. I think it's fair to say as well, when you look at the sales of the Routemaster outside of London Transport, that very few operators would have bought the rear engine Routemaster. Potentially it could have been a much more expensive bus, or would it? As AEC have raided the parts bin to build it, it might have been cheaper. But I do suspect that operators would have stuck with the more tried and tested Leland Atlantean, Daimler Fleetline and Bristol VR. And I think it would have turned into a bit of a Leland Titan of its time. Quite a rare bus outside of London. So to answer the question, do I think that the rear engine Routemaster would have been a success had it have been entered into production? No, I don't. But at the same time, I like to think somewhere there's a parallel universe where London Transport only built one prototype AEC Merlin, and that was raved about by the drivers and the passengers, and meanwhile had a fleet of rear engine Routemasters that were only in service for about 5 years before they were all withdrawn for unreliability problems. But as I said at the start of the video, it is a very interesting what might have been, isn't it? So what do you think? What are your thoughts on the rear engine Routemaster? Do you think it would have been a success? Do you think it was a hit, miss or a maybe? Let me know in the comments down below. If you enjoyed this video, please like and share it. And don't forget to subscribe to my channel so that you don't miss my future releases in this and my other series as well. But thank you ever so much for supporting the channel by watching my videos. It means so much to me and it's really, really appreciated. Bye for now.